What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as Hamhocks42 on the internet, and today we are looking at another random magic card. All right, so today, what is it that we've got on the docket? We've got Scale Blessing. It is an instant for 3 generic, 1 white, bolster 1, then put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, now okay, so this is the first time I'm seeing this. This is an uncommon from Dragons of Tarkhir. And let's see, what does Bolster 1 do? To Bolster 1, choose a creature with the least toughness among creatures you control and put a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, so I can appreciate that idea. Find like choose the weakest creature that you have and buff it up a little bit. All right, and the reason that you choose it is because if you have multiple creatures that are tied for that lowest toughness, you get to pick which one it is. So okay, I can appreciate that, and especially in like armies that consist of weenies or something like that, which you might see in white. It wouldn't be uncommon. You may have 3 or 4 things that all have 1 toughness or 2 toughness. So okay, you know you pick one, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you put an additional +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, that to me, that sounds like old school proliferate. Like that sounds like an early attempt at proliferate. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were happy with the results that they saw here, because obviously proliferate has become its own keyword, and it doesn't just apply to +1/+1 counters, it applies to all counters across the board. So that's pretty cool. I can appreciate kind of an early attempt at that because proliferating with +1/+1 counters is absolutely a viable strategy. There's nothing wrong with that, as a way of just permanently buffing your entire army. And if you're going wide, that actually is really valuable because something when you have a buff that puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature, um, is generally like that's generally better than it reads because that +1/+1 counter doesn't go anywhere. It sticks around. Also, the other cool thing about this is it's an instant. So the upside of this card is excellent. Downside, it worst case scenario. You don't have any other creatures that have +1/+1 counters on them. Or your weakest creature is also the only one that already has a +1/+1 counter. So absolute worst case scenario, you're just getting 2 +1/+1 counters because you put the one on the weakest creature you've got, and then you put another one on it. Now, even that situationally could be pretty decent. The only issue with that is it costs 4. Like for a combat trick where that's the best you can do, like 4 is awfully expensive. Um, However, the other thing that you could do here is if you have a situation where all of your creatures have +1/+1 counters on them already for some reason, whether they whether some effect allowed them to come in with +1/+1 counters, like a Grumgully or what is it, Nylea, I think it is, that allows anyway, one of the demigods from Theros allows creatures to come in with +1/+1 counters on it. But actually that's an ability that we see a lot throughout the years, especially in green. So if you're doing like a Selesnya situation, um, putting counters on a lot of creatures is not hard to do. And if you have a deck that's already doing that, topping it off with Scales Blessing at instant speed as a potential like huge overrun blowout on your opponent could be pretty fun. Wait for them to like set up their blockers, do all their math, and then you could just be like, oh, by the way, that one little weenie that you thought you could just eat, actually that has is now 2 bigger than you thought, and everything else is +1 bigger. So all that really careful combat math you just did, now throw all of that out, and now all these things are so much bigger. Um, that's cool. Like, there's a possibility there that's pretty neat. And then you combine that with other cards that allow you to proliferate. Oh my goodness, the potential here to really just pop off is there. The upside on this card is really, really high. 4 is expensive for an upside that is that situational. So that's my only concern with this really. And because the floor is so low on it, the fact that well, I mean, absolute worst case scenario, you don't have a board and you top deck this. But like worst case scenario, when you would play this in an attempt to get some value out of it, you're getting 2 +1/+1 counters on one of your creatures. Now, the only thing about that really stinks is it's the weakest creature, so you don't have flexibility over which creature gets the counter. If this red put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, and then put an additional +1/+1 counter on all creatures you control. Like bolster as a keyword in this particular instance is really not doing you any favors because it's only restricting your choices. And that stinks. That's the word I was looking for. So yeah, all in all, like I feel like this is fine. Like in limited, I'm not going to be super mad if I get this. Although like a 4 mana combat trick, that's not something that I want to pick early. But if this were to wheel and I have other cards that could synergize with it, I'm not mad. I don't know the Dragons of Tarkir format super well as far as limited goes, so I don't know exactly how that lines up. But like constructed, this is just a little too clunky. The big benefit though is that it is an instant speed, because modifying your creatures, like pumping your creatures at instant speed, can be really, really cool. You can do a lot of powerful things with that. So that's not nothing. I can definitely appreciate that. So I don't know. There are probably applications out there, but eh, I don't know. Anyway, so the artwork that we can see here, we have a soldier kneeling, and in the foreground you see a dragon's claw, kind of reaching out and tapping him on the shoulder, and it's clearly bestowing. There's some kind of majestic, magical energy transferring from the claw into the soldier. So it looks very similar to. This is actually reminiscent of a knighting ceremony. So when you think of a knight kneeling before their liege and they lay the sword on their shoulders. It looks like that, except the dragon is using their claw. So that's pretty cool. And so in the Dragons of Tarkir block, where the dragons were like the dominant force on Tarkir, that makes sense. I can also appreciate how the soldier's armor is vaguely reminiscent of like dragon scales and like the imagery that we associate with dragon horns and claws. Just kind of the motifs around the helmet and the um, the shoulder plating. Like it looks like it's like it resembles dragons. So in a timeline where the dragons are in charge, yeah, it makes sense that draconic imagery would appear even on the human's armor. So I can definitely appreciate that. And the flavor text here is, "Your bravery honors us all," and that's attributed to Dramoka, translated from Draconic. Oh, okay. So the dragons couldn't speak English or Common, or I guess that's it. Actually, I find that interesting that in the flavor text here, it calls out a translation, um, specifically because Magic being a multiverse, the idea, I have never once considered what language do the people speak in Magic. Now, that's a common thought that occurs. I know in D&D there are whole systems around languages, and when you're watching television, when they like sci-fi shows, there's the question of like, well, in Star Trek, why do they all speak English, or whatever language you're watching it in? And the truth is, like, oh, they have universal translators. And like, oh, how does that work? Don't worry about it. Like, but they do like, there's this hand wavium that like, yes, they all speak different languages, but it'd be almost unwatchable if we had to do that. So there's some way that they can all understand each other. Like Farseek had translator microbes that they actually injected into people, like that kind of stuff. Anyway, and in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there was the babblefish that went into Arthur Dent's ear, that would translate for him, like that kind of stuff. That kind of hand wavium is there because we do have to acknowledge that whenever you're dealing with multiple cultures, multiple areas, people coming from all these different backgrounds that have been geographically separated as they developed, yeah, of course their languages aren't going to be the same. That'd be bizarre, and like that's impossible for languages to develop, in parallel like that. But in Magic, we have a multiverse situation where for some reason there are humans all over the place, which, okay, you could do some hand wavium for that. And that I'm not really too worried about. Like, whatever. But the fact that they can all understand each other and the planeswalkers can all communicate with one another, what is the reason for that? Now, I'm not aware of any lore reason why the languages are the same. I just had never considered it, except now this card, the flavor text is saying that, oh, Dromoka's words had to be translated from Draconic. And now I'm thinking, well, okay, what language were they translated into? And who speaks that language? Is it a native Tarkir language? Is it a native Tarkir language in the timeline of Dragons of Tarkir and it wasn't necessarily in Khans of Tarkir? Is it Is there some kind of common language that exists throughout the multiverse? You know, when a planeswalker just drops in on Tarkir, how do they know? Like, how are they able to communicate with one another? I'm seriously wondering how does that work? Because I don't know. And on top of that, it had never occurred to me to even ask that question until something like this. And so that's one of those things. So for all you writers out there who are interested in creating creative fiction, know what you're calling attention to, because that's one of those things. Had this just been your bravery honors us all, Dramoka, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. It's like, oh, okay, the dragon is honoring their soldier, and they're, bestowing a blessing onto that soldier, which makes them more powerful. Cool. Like flavorfully, that all lines up. Everything's good. Except now, instead of appreciating all of that and the hard work that Matt Stewart did on this artwork, which is very good, by the way, because I mean, well, it's magic on it. It's a modern magic card. Of course, the art's good. Again, if you're making artwork on magic cards, thank you. Your work is phenomenal. Um, and so, it's a beautiful piece, but now I'm completely distracted by all of that because of one little comment, because of three words in the flavor text. And I find that that really breaks the immersion on this card, which is a bit of a shame, I got to admit. But at the same time, like, it is what it is. Overthinking is kind of what we do here. And the language question when it comes to fantasy and science fiction is one that every single property ends up facing. So the fact that I personally haven't faced it with Magic before, I guess, this is just kind of a moment when I can no longer appreciate just the innocent naivete in the fact that Jace can talk to Vraska and no one cares why or how. Um, but alas, here we are. And now I will forever wonder. Now, if you know the reason for that, if you're aware of the lore reason why people from different planes can actually communicate, please let me know. I'd love to hear it. Is that something like, do planeswalkers have some kind of mystical ability where they can like translate as they jump between planes? I would love to know. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out, everybody. Oh man, but that even if they have some kind of magical ability where they can translate, then that brings up the other question of are they translating just the language of like humanoid races, or can they also like talk to animals and stuff? I don't know. Like, how does this work? Ah, how does this work? Anyway, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and go into a tailspin, trying to worrying about multiverse linguistics. And thank you so much for hanging out. I appreciate it. I'm going to go freak out about that. If you have some way of regaining my sanity and explaining how the hell this all works, I would really appreciate it if you'd hit me up on Twitter at Hox42 or pop by my live stream over on Twitch, twitch.tv/hamhox42. And please, please tell me how this works. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out. You're the best. Have a wonderful day. I will catch you next time.